You're listening to Packers Talk Network.
Packers Talk.
You're listening to No Huddle Radio on the Packers Talk Radio Network, your home for in-depth and thoughtful Packers analysis. I'm your host, Gil Martin. My co-host is my good friend, Sean Tehan. In addition to this show, I write for the PackersPost.com and Cheesehead TV, and Sean was a TV sportscaster in Minnesota. We're here to talk Packers because you're all here for one thing, and that's a love for Green Bay football. Sean, we have reached the offseason. The Packers season came to an unfortunate end last Sunday in Philadelphia. Before we start diving into what all of this means, how about a word from our sponsor?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no more Packer football this year, but before we get started, a few words about our sponsor, Wisconsin's own Ticket King. Even though the Packers season is over, for over 30 years, Ticket King has been providing Packers tickets to Packer fans. You can find them on the web at theticketking.com or visit their locations in Green Bay and Milwaukee for future ticket purchases. For direct links to specific Packers game tickets, go to packerstalk.com/tickets or browse their website at theticketking.com. If you're following us on YouTube live right now, thank you so much for joining us. Right there, the link is right there on your screen, packerstalk.com/tickets. And you can watch every episode of No Huddle Radio on the Packers Talk Network on YouTube. Click on the bell, turn the notifications on. You can join the discussion, chat with us live. We love to see and talk about the comments coming our way from anyone streaming with us online.
So here we are. We are. The offseason has begun, and already lots of stuff going on.
Yeah, it was a bit of a weird year in the end, Gil, where the Packers, they start 11-4. They look like they're playing really good football in November. Things seem to be clicking. Jordan Love appeared to be healthier, but then the bottom just kind of fell out. They lost their last 3 games, including the playoff loss at Philadelphia, 22-10, where the Packers, they turned the ball over 4 times. The defense played pretty well for the most part, but the offense just couldn't get anything going. And just a lot of issues and a lot of – I don't think we need to completely turn this roster over upside down and completely change everything. We don't need to fire a bunch of coaches, nothing like that. But given all the way that the season ended, how it ended so poorly after Festivus, what needs to change for the Green Bay Packers going into 2025, Gil?
You know, one thing I think this team needs is a little veteran leadership. I think that is something that, I mean, they have some guys who can fit that description, but some of them were not playing up to their potential this year, and that makes it harder to lead when you're not leading from, in front. And I just think that in big moments, this team came up small, and that, Matt LaFleur spoke about Jordan Love needing to be a little bit more of a vocal leader. There are some other players who certainly need that, but I think they may need 1 or 2 more experienced veterans in the room who, when it comes to big games, have been there and done that and will know what to do and how to get the team to play their best when it matters most.
Yeah, it was a team that lost 7 games, obviously, and 6 of those losses were to Minnesota, Detroit, and Philly, where those teams they lost to twice the entire season. And it was just very troubling to see that, where they just couldn't really adapt. They couldn't get to that level. The Packers were still a good football team this year, but they're not. They're a very good football team, but they're not elite, not yet. And we got to remember that this was still the youngest football team in the NFL this year. This year's Packer team and last year's Packer team were the 2 youngest football teams to make the playoffs in the last 50 years since the NFL started tracking that. I mean, that's a pretty outstanding statistic to look at, where good things are happening in Green Bay. Obviously, last year, I feel like the Packers were so ahead of schedule when they had that big win in the playoffs at Dallas, and then they nearly beat the eventual NFC champion San Francisco 49ers in Santa Clara. And you're thinking, oh man, next step is they're going to go to the NFC championship. But it just didn't work out this year. They need some veteran infusion, though. I'm with you there, Gil. And I will say, though, that Philadelphia game, 3 big things that really stood out to me was the offensive line. After Elton Jenkins went down, they got whooped. And it was an offensive line that was relatively healthy most of the year, but Elgton Jenkins was a big part of that. And they clearly were lost without his presence on the O-line. It had just such a huge ripple effect where Travis Glover was committing a bunch of penalties. Kadeem Telford had his struggles as well. And then Josh Myers got hurt as well. And we just got in such a bad situation. There was not much of a passing game against Philadelphia either. And the loss of Christian Watson really, really appeared to be a big, big thing for the Packers. And then I feel like Matt LaFleur is a head coach. I'm not saying he needs to get canned, but he needs to do quite a bit of self-scouting, self-evaluation this offseason because the offensive creativity was gone. There was no play action. And there was just a lot more questions of Matt LaFleur than answers. And I just feel like those are the big three factors. Is the offensive line needs a little more depth. The receiver room needs a little more depth as well, given the Watson injury. And Matt LaFleur's coaching, he needs to self-evaluate and really learn how he can improve as a head coach because it was not a very good last few games of the season. And I feel like those are the three main factors.
So to address what you said, yeah, Elgton Jenkins, probably the guy they could least afford to lose just because of the way the depth at the position kind of plays itself out. And, they went with the rookie first. He couldn't do it. Kadeem Telford struggled also. He wasn't great. And then I don't know whether this was a ripple effect, but boy, Zach Tom struggled also, probably had his worst game of the year at what is obviously the worst possible time. So, that was a factor. And as far as Matt LaFleur is concerned, it's interesting. When Jordan Love went down in week 1, he was so creative in constructing game plans for Malik Willis. And then when Jordan Love came back, it was like, okay, it's all on Jordan now. We could just do what we do. But the creativity part of it just seemed to dissipate after that. And when the offense started to struggle a little bit, because what happened was the identity of the offense after Jordan Love got hurt became Josh Jacobs. We are a run-first team. But the creativity in the passing game kind of disappeared after that, and we needed it to pick back up.
Yeah, and that passing game, even though the Packers, the defense pitched the first shutout of the 2024 season on Festivus against the Saints on Monday Night Football when they won 30-0, the Packers' passing game on offense, that was clearly the weakest part of that game. Everything else was really good, but the passing game on offense seemed to have some issues on that Monday night game, and it was masked by that 30-0 win over a Saints team that was super beat up and pretty much done. They were checked out for the season, looking ahead to Cancun or Cabo, whatever, and it was just a matter of there was a lot of issues in that passing game. There wasn't good cohesion there, and I do wonder with that knee injury that Jordan Love suffered in week 1, was he ever really 100%? Later this year, where was the playbook a little limited? Is that why he was more in shotgun? Is that why there was less play action? And Matt LaFleur did say to the media earlier this week that they had the numbers that showed that running on the shotgun, they were more productive and efficient than running with the quarterback under center, and essentially the play action was not as effective this year. I don't know about that. I really don't know about that, but I feel like that was their way of saying, Jordan Love, we couldn't really do everything because he wasn't quite right all year.
I do get the feeling that the injury played a role in the reduced effectiveness and in his lack of accuracy at times, especially right when he first came back. That first half of the first Minnesota game, wow. He was clearly not himself and not confident that he was ready, to do all the things he needed to do. So that was a part of it. But you look back at the playoff game, no Christian Watson to start the game. Romeo Doubs gets his second concussion in 4 or 5 weeks. Yeah. That is a big concern. And by the end of the game, it was like Dontavian Wicks, Bo Melton, and Malik Heath. And that was pretty much the only 3 guys at receiver who were left on the roster. So, and who were healthy enough to play. So that was super depleted. But even so, you had too many drops by too many receivers for most of the season.
Yep.
You had guys who were in and out of the lineup with injuries. You had the 1-game suspension for Romeo Doubs. Jaden Reed started off really hot and faded in a big way in the second half. There was no consistency in the passing game. They finished 12th in the league in passing yards. It's not like they were, 30th or something. They weren't awful, but the expectations that we came into the season with were not met.
And you can look at it where I think there's still a lot of talent on the Packers offense. I think there's a lot of talent in that receiver room. And it's good to know that there's a lot of guys still growing. Even though last year it felt like, that's the growing pain year. We exceeded expectations, but there were growing pains clearly this year. There were more growing pains. That's going to happen. Football is a hard game, man. And I feel like football is the sport that, and no disrespect to any other sport, but you don't deal with adversity as much in any other sport in comparison to football. And it's just a matter of how do you handle it? Can you handle it better than the other person? Can you handle it better than the guy across from you? And that's always the challenge, is who can handle adversity better. And this is just what the Packers kind of have to go through. And speaking of, though, the Jordan Love knee injury that he may have been dealing with all year, the Romeo Doubs suspension, a guy who has ties to both of those experiences is Jaire Alexander. The Packers had locker room clean out on Monday, and Jaire Alexander, when he was asked to speak to the media, he refused to talk, said doesn't even know if he's going to be in Green Bay next year, say he didn't have anything good to say, so he wasn't going to talk. Obviously, Jaire dealt with that torn PCL in his knee. He only played 6-7 games this year, didn't return after leaving that game against Chicago after the bye week. He was put on season-ending IR late in the season. It's a very interesting situation. He's due a lot of money, and he hasn't really played a lot. He's missed more than half the games in the last few years since he signed that big contract extension a few years ago. Gil, is Jaire Alexander done as a Packer?
Maybe. Before the comments he made on Monday, I would have said, nah, it's just people talking. But after what he said, I begin to think that maybe the relationship between the player and the team is a little more strained than we were led to believe. And look, it's right after a playoff loss. He just underwent surgery. He had been rehabbing for half the season and unsuccessfully trying to get back on the field. I get it. He's frustrated, okay? And what he says at that moment may be more frustration and the emotions of the moment than it is his long-term beliefs and strategies. But after what he said, I am definitely saying that it's 50-50 at best that Jaire Alexander is back, because also, if they're going to move on from him this offseason, they have this little out, the way the contract is structured. It's either going to happen now or it's going to cost them dearly if they wait another year.
And the Packers cap situation right now is in really good shape in comparison to the past 2 years, where Brian Gutekunst actually has real money to play with this offseason. And he's still, remember, this is a GM who got Xavier McKinney and Josh Jacobs last year, even though he had some cap limitations, but still made it work. Now, Brian Gutekunst, he did speak to the media on Thursday, and he was asked about the Jaire situation. He said there's frustration from both sides, and Jaire can't get out and play. Regarding that, there's frustration on both sides that he can't get out and play, but there's no disconnect between the organization and Jaire Alexander. Brian Gutekunst did say his contract doesn't really necessarily prohibit a return, and the Packers can work through it. They can afford to keep him this year on his current contract. But, Gil, I really do think that's code for we'd like to trade Jaire, but we can afford to keep him if we don't get a good enough offer. I don't think they want to straight up cut him. I think they want to try to get some draft capital, maybe a player included with some draft capital, or you throw some draft capital with Jaire Alexander as well in return. I don't think they want to give him away for free. And I think that's just Brian Gutekunst making a stance right now where it's like, hey, NFL, guess what? Like, you want this guy, give me a call.
Right. And look, he'd be foolish to come out and say, yeah, we're done, because he has no leverage that way.
Absolutely.
So he's got to maximize his leverage. So, of course, he's going to say, yeah, we'll work it out. We have enough room to keep him. And we'll see what happens. Look, here are the facts. In 3 of the last 4 seasons, he has played 7 games or fewer. 7, and I think it was 4 4 years ago with 16-game full schedule minus this 1-game suspension mixed in. So if the most important ability in the NFL is availability, he hasn't been that, okay? But I'll say this. Regardless of what some other people may say, if he's healthy and he's on the field, he is head and shoulders their best cover corner. Nobody else on this roster even comes, I think you got to go like 2 levels down from Jaire to the next cover guy as of right now. Now, could Carrington Valentine improve as he develops? Sure. Could they sign a free agent or draft, a corner in the first round? Yeah, absolutely. But right now on this roster, there is nobody who even comes close to being a shutdown corner than a healthy Jaire Alexander. So, if you have a crystal ball and he could be healthy, you're better off with him on the field than not, unless he's going to be a distraction. And whether it's LaFleur or Gutekunst, they're probably both going to speak to Jaire and figure out whether or not they can get back on the same page or whether they have to move on.
It just seems like the relationship has kind of reached a boiling point where it just seems like the best case scenario, the best thing for the Packers and for Jaire is just a clean break, and it's just to move on. And that's just kind of the way things go. And it's just a bummer because I echo everything you said about Jaire, where he's easily their best corner. When he's on his game, he may be their best defensive player, Gil. That's how special a player he really is. And he just seems so bought in with the new defensive scheme. He had a couple interceptions in the first 4 games of the year, and he seemed all in on Jeff Hafley's scheme and really seemed to be excelling well in the situation. It seemed like he was primed to have a big season. And then that fluke injury happens in Jacksonville, and he wasn't the same. And it really, really stinks, and it's a bummer. Now, I do want to ask you, Gil, where Tucker Kraft said at Locker Room Clean Out on Monday that with the Packers losing their final 3 games, he could kind of feel what was brewing for the Packers, said the Packers need to wake up. It just seems like maybe this is Jaire, maybe this is other guys too, but it just seems like that there's some issues in the locker room and some guys who are, kind of putting their wants and needs and their goals ahead of the team goal and everything. And we mentioned Romeo Doubs when he was suspended 1 game for conduct detrimental earlier this season. Outside of Jaire, who we think he's going to be on the move, I would be very surprised if he's in training camp with the Green Bay Packers coming up in August this year. But which Packers could surprisingly be on the move? Because I think there's a chance that Romeo Doubs may get traded this offseason as well.
I think there's a chance Romeo Doubs may even decide to retire, depending on how bad the concussions are.
Yeah, that's scary. That's scary. That's first and foremost.
Yeah,
too.
I mean, let's say this: we want Romeo Doubs as the person to have a healthy rest of his life, regardless of what happens on the football field.
Yes,
that to me is first and foremost. But yeah, I mean, that is a definite concern that Doubs may not be back. Jordan Love loves Romeo Doubs. They have great chemistry. So I don't think Love would prefer that they move on from Romeo Doubs. But first, he has to figure out whether or not he wants to continue to play football. 2 serious concussions in 4 or 5 weeks is not good. They're cumulative. Each concussion makes you more susceptible to another one. Each one is more serious than the previous one.
Sam Shields is a prime example. Sam Shields is a prime example.
Right. And the long-term effects just get worse as far as how your body responds to it. So that's first. And then, the second thing is, can Romeo Doubs be satisfied with his role in the offense? We know there's no Christian Watson for the first half of next season, at least. So there will be opportunities there, but will Romeo Doubs want to play, A, and B, want to come back to this offense in whatever role he'll discuss with Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst, and we'll see. But yeah, there are a lot of questions up and down this roster right now as we head into the offseason.
Now, outside of Doubs and Jaire, are there any other Packers, Gil, that you could see surprisingly being on the move? I personally can't. I'm just curious to know if there's anyone you think that if if we get an alert on our phones coming up in March that, hey, player X has been traded to team Y, is there someone that we could see or getting released too by the Packers? Is there someone who could be a surprise outside of these two?
I'd be surprised only because, as you mentioned, the cap situation is very, very healthy. Mm-hmm. And like without cutting anybody, they could restructure a bunch of contracts and create, I think I read somewhere between like $50 and $55 million more in cap space.
Yep.
So if you can create another half, $50 million in cap space without letting anybody go, why let somebody go? I mean, it just, if you're trading someone and you're getting something big back, that's a different story. But to just let someone go, you don't need to free up the space. So why do it?
Yeah, you just wonder if other guys have prerogatives that essentially they want to benefit themselves and not the team, and they don't have the team goals in mind. What comes to mind is when Brian Gutekunst took over that first offseason, one of his first moves was trading away Demarius Randall. Right. And he was a guy who had a really good rookie year, and then he was solid in Green Bay. He was a solid corner, but clearly he was an issue in the locker room, and they moved him and they traded him for some draft capital and backup quarterback DeShone Kizer. And it was a matter of just like, we were surprised. We were pretty surprised. Like, really, that happened? But then you learn it's like, the guy was a problem. And if there's a guy that's that much of a problem in the locker room, they tend to not last very long in Green Bay. That's just a matter of they want them to be someone else's problem and not their problem. Now, with the Romeo Doubs situation, with the concussion situation, if he's not happy with the amount of targets he's getting in the Packer offense, and Christian Watson's injury, we got to mention Davante Adams, the former Packer great who was on the Kay Adams podcast earlier this week. He said he would be open to returning to any of his prior teams. He's currently with the New York Jets. He also noted he's willing to stay with the Jets. Obviously, Davante had a great run in Green Bay in his first 8 seasons in the NFL. Second in team history to Donald Driver in total catches, fourth in Green Bay history in receiving yards, and second only to Don Hudson in receiving touchdowns. Davante Adams was on track to have his jersey retired in Green Bay if he stayed as a Packer, but then he left for the Vegas Raiders. He wasn't happy there. He moved on. And now it's a matter of the New York Jets may be looking to rebuild going forward, and Davante Adams could be a trade piece. And let me ask you, Gil, if Davante Adams is open to coming to Green Bay, should the Packers try bringing Davante Adams back to Titletown? Because I would love it, but only for the right price.
Well, that's the thing that I was just about to say. If we're paying him $20 million a year, pass. I mean, that's just, I would pay him $20 million a year for 2020 Davante Adams, but not for 2025 Davante Adams.
Yeah.
So if the price is right, look, we talked about the need for veteran leadership. We talked about the need to improve the receiver depth, especially when we know Christian Watson is out. Davante Adams could check a bunch of those boxes, but not at a very exorbitant price. So to me, if he's willing to come back at a I wouldn't quite say team friendly. He's not playing for the league minimum, but he sure as heck can't make $20 million this year either.
Now, the big thing with Davante Adams, his current contract, remember, he signed a 5-year deal when he left the Packers for the Raiders back in 2021. Obviously, he was traded by the Packers to the Raiders, but he signed that contract with the Raiders as part of the deal. He only has 2 years left on that deal. So, and I believe it's not as much of a cap hit, those last 2 years of that contract. That's a better question for a cap guru, a cap genius. I'm not exactly sure what the Davante Adams situation is with the contract, but there's a way to bring that cap number down, most likely, whether it is the Jets taking out more money or the Packers taking out more money if they give a lower draft pick to the Jets. He's going to be 33 next December. The passing game, though, looks so disjointed in that last month of the year for the Packers. And there's a lot, you mentioned, Gil, where it's like getting a veteran into Green Bay may be a good thing. He knows the offense. He still has a good relationship with the organization. That's his words. He still has a good relationship with Brian Gutekunst, with Matt LaFleur. He knows this offense, and he's been very public about how much he really admires how much Jordan Love has improved since he was there in Green Bay. Why not? Why not try to bring him back? But I wouldn't give anything more than a day 3 pick for him. Right. Fourth rounder at best. But that's a call that I'm willing to, whoever decides to run the New York Jets. And John Eric Sullivan, he's one of the guys in the front office for the Packers right now. He's one of the guys interviewing for that Jets GM job. Mm-hmm. Guess what? If he gets that job in New York, if I'm Brian Gutekunst, I'm calling him and be like, hey, what's it going to take to get Davante back to Green Bay? And that's like, you know someone, you have that relationship, make a deal happen.
Would you trade Jaire for Davante and maybe the Packers get some draft capital back?
Say that again? Would
you trade Jaire Alexander for Davante Adams if the Packers also get some draft capital back?
I think I would trade Jaire. If I would trade Jaire and get a player back, I'd like to get a defensive player back. Okay. I'd like to maybe get an edge rusher or a corner even. I think I'd want to go defense for defense there. But if the price is not as high and you get Davante Adams return with a draft pick and you send out a day 3 pick as well, then yeah, hey, I'm open to talking as well, Gil. So that's an interesting situation where we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it's most likely the Packers want to stay young. Brian Gutekunst wants to stay young. I doubt this happens, but it's just so intriguing where could you imagine if Davante comes back and he eclipses a few receiving records being back in Green Bay for the final 2 years of that contract, and then if he comes back and has he's at the back end of his career. I don't know if he has 2 great years left in him, but if he does, he's in the consideration for having his jersey number retired legitimately in Green Bay.
He is, and here's the other thing. The thing about Davante Adams, he did not rely on his speed. That was not the primary reason he got open. So he should not be as affected as he gets older as, someone like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who if the speed is no longer there, his effectiveness is going to be drastically reduced. The way Davante got open was by deception, by disguising what the pattern was going to be, by winning off the snap of the ball. He can still do those kind of things. Mm-hmm. Probably at 33, 34, 35. He's smart. He's savvy. I think he has the potential to have another 2, 3, 4 solid seasons, in this league if he takes care of himself and puts the time in. But, would he get his number retired with 2 or 3 more good seasons in Green Bay? Yeah, I think he would.
Oh yeah, he's a Packer legend already statistically. But Daryl Lazine chiming in on the YouTube chat saying Adams doesn't have to be traded. He might become a free agent. There's no guarantees him staying in New York as a Jet. That is very true. Obviously, I think the Jets are going to be kind of playing the same game as the Packers, where I think they're going to look to trade him. But if they can't, then they'll let him go. And maybe the Packers can bring him back at a cheaper price. We don't know, though. It's just a great unknown. Davante Adams is a tremendous teammate. He's a tremendous football player. He's just really a good guy and a good background, and he loved playing in Green Bay. It's just the uncertainty at the quarterback spot moving forward was a problem, and that's pretty much it. But Matthew Tan also asking, what about T. Higgins? I don't know, man. That guy may get 35 million a year, possibly. I think he's going to get close to 30 million a year, but maybe a little bit expensive for the Packers. I'd rather use that money on a Zach Tom extension. But, hey, we'll see. The Packers supposedly are interested in T. Higgins. That's the report, but it's going to be a crazy couple months of speculation. We'll see what happens actually on day 1 of free agency in March. Gil, speaking of free agency, the Packers, they have some unrestricted free agents coming up. Let's play a little game. Should they stay or should they go? And we're going to go one by one with the Packer free agents coming up this March. Should they stay or should they go? Linebacker Eric Wilson.
I'd bring him back at a reasonable rate.
Yep, and I'm with you there. I'm open to him staying, but I'm fine if he's let go. If you can bring him back on a cheap deal, if he's still available, solid rotational linebacker and special teamer. Remember, the Packers re-signed him 11 days into free agency during last offseason. That's a guy I would be very much in the camp of. Should they stay or should they go? Linebacker Isaiah McDuffie.
I would love to have him stay, but more as like your depth piece. He would be the first guy you put in the lineup if someone else gets hurt.
Now, McDuffie had 97 total tackles this past year and 3 tackles for loss. I'm in the same boat with Eric Wilson, where I'm open to him staying, but I'm fine to let him go. I feel like the year he had and how productive he was when he was on the field, statistically, I feel like a team's going to offer him a little more money than the Packers are willing to cough up. And with the Packers having Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper settled in at off-ball linebacker, you got Tyron Hopper, who you drafted in round 3 last year. I think McDuffie is going to go, but I'd be open to him coming back at the right price.
And I would say this before you move on.
Sure.
I would like one of those two to be back. It doesn't almost matter to me which one. I want one of them back.
Yeah, for sure. Should they stay or should they go? Cornerback Robert Rochelle.
I would leave that up to the special teams coordinator. And, he's not going to cost a lot. So if he wants to come back and continue to play special teams at a, league minimum or close to it, I'm fine with him coming back. If he decides to move on, I guess I'm fine with that too.
I think for Rochelle's sake, he should go because I think the Packers are going to invest a lot of resources in the cornerback room this offseason. I don't think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for him in Green Bay, but if they need a body and he's still looking for work, bring him back. He seems like a good teammate, so I'm all for that. Should they stay or should they go? Cornerback Corey Ballentine.
Ballentine is useful. He always seems to either start as a special teams guy / reserve or even on the practice squad. And he always ends up on the roster and always ends up playing. He's useful. Again, I don't think you break the bank for Corey Ballentine, but if he wants to come back and the price is right, I have no problem with that.
Very much in the camp of you don't race to sign this guy right away, but I wouldn't mind seeing him back because we've seen that he could do a service at quarterback, but I feel like for Ballentine's sake, it's same as Rochelle, where he should go elsewhere because I think the Packers are going to look to totally change up that cornerback room this offseason. And then the last corner, should they stay or should they go? Former first-round pick, cornerback Eric Stokes.
I think Stokes would benefit from a change of scenery.
Yes.
I think that he would also cost more to keep than any of the other guys we mentioned. I think it's time to move on. I wish Eric Stokes the best. He's a good kid, but he never lived up to his billing, and I think it is time.
Yeah, a former first-round pick. He had a really good rookie year, really, really sticky as a cover corner, but just never improved. And he had that nasty injury in year 2. He dealt with injuries in year 3, and he just never caught on. I have a feeling that Eric Stokes' career may be over in the NFL. He just really did not play well in a scheme that I thought he was going to really do better. I thought he was going to improve and show a lot of improvement in, but he didn't. He didn't get one pass deflection this year. Not one pass deflection. He was on the field quite a bit, and he just struggled mightily. It's kind of like Jaire Alexander, where he needs a clean break from the Packers, and the Packers need that too. Should they stay or should they go? Defensive tackle TJ Slaton.
I would like to bring back TJ Slaton. He plays a particular role. He plays it fairly well. I would like him to stay.
I am right there with you, Gil, too. I think he should stay, but it should be for the right price. He's a 330-pound behemoth. He was the focal point of the renaissance of the Packers' rushing defense this year. Remember, the Packers' rushing defense, they held opposing ball carries to 4 yards per carry. That was third best in the NFL, and less than 100 rushing yards per game. That was 7th in the league. And as long as he doesn't command more than $3.5–4 million a year, I'm open to bringing TJ Slaton back. It's a very comparable deal to a guy like a veteran run defender in Jordan Phillips in Buffalo. Sebastian Joseph Day has similar money with the Tennessee Titans. Derek Nottie for the Kansas City Chiefs, only 28 years old, got a $2 million deal as primarily a run defender on the D line. So Slaton, as long as you're not paying more than $3–4 million a year, I'm cool with bringing TJ Slaton back. Should they stay or should they go? Tight end Tyler Davis.
Special teams only, really. I don't see a role for him as a tight end at this point. He's missed the last 2 seasons with injuries. I don't think he's back. I know Rich Bisaccia loves him. I don't know if Rich Bisaccia is back, so that's a whole different issue. But I think Tyler Davis, they may re-sign him, but I don't think he would survive training camp.
Yeah, the tight end room is in really good shape, too, for the Green Bay Packers. And like you said, Gil, it's all about availability in the NFL. And Tyler Davis hasn't been available. He's missed the last 2 years with brutal season-ending injuries in each of the last 2 preseasons. It's time for him to go. Should they stay or should they go? Former first-round pick of the Philadelphia Eagles, veteran offensive tackle, Andre Dillard.
To be honest with you, I don't think he's back. I don't think they need him back.
No.
I think you find an alternative veteran backup offensive lineman for a reasonable rate. Dillard struggled in training camp. He barely played on offense in the regular season. And I just don't think he is ever going to live up to that first-round billing.
He played 13 total snaps for the Packers this season. He was inactive for 5 regular season games and the Packers playoff game. And there was not a lot of opportunity for him because the Packers O-line was pretty healthy for the most part this year. But he's a guy who they clearly, obviously, he has a lot of really good athletic traits, and there's a lot of value with the kind of athleticism that he has at the tackle position. But I feel like the Packers would benefit from just drafting a few offensive linemen late, drafting some projects and seeing if they can develop them. I think Andre Dillard should go. Should they stay or should they go? The mayor of Door County, Quadzilla, running back A.J. Dillon.
I love A.J. Dillon, but the Packers are 4 deep at running back right now, and A.J. Dillon would be the 5th. Now, look, you always need running backs. Guys can get hurt at any time, but I just don't see A.J. Dillon having any playing time here in Green Bay. For his sake, he should try to go elsewhere and find a place where he has a role. And I think in his comments to the media this week, he more or less said he sees the writing on the wall.
Yeah, the running back room is in such great shape. There's no room for even a healthy A.J. Dillon right now. Right. And that neck injury, you just hope that he's healthy enough to play football again. He will always be a Green Bay Packer, but A.J. Dillon, he should go. I'm very much in that camp with you. Should they stay or should they go? Kicker Brandon McManus had a terrific season. Only missed 2 field goals, including the playoffs. Didn't miss an extra point this year after a lot of inconsistency at the kicking spot since Mason Crosby departed from Green Bay. Brian Gutekunst said today, Gil, that he wants Brandon McManus back for the future in Green Bay. This is a no-brainer, right? He should be back, right?
Open and shut. They want him back after everything this team has been through since Mason Crosby retired at kicker. I mean, I think at some point since OTAs started, there were like 7 or 8 kickers in and out of Green Bay at one point or another. McManus solved the kicking problem. Bring the guy back.
Yeah, don't overthink this. Just get a deal done before free agency, and let's not have to worry about the kicking spot for the long term, or for the at least a few years down the road.
To quote Bull Durham, don't think, meat. Don't think.
I love it. And should they stay or should they go? Our final one, former second-round pick, center Josh Myers. This is kind of a split one, Gil. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Josh Myers, if he should stay or go.
There's 2 ways to look at this. Did Josh Myers ever live up to his draft status? No. Would the Packers have been better off taking a certain other player who was drafted right after him? Yeah. Yes. But
who's currently the highest paid center in football now.
Yes. If Josh Myers is willing to come back at a team-friendly rate, he's smart, he is consistent. He's not great, but he's consistent. And the one thing I would say, and I'm not the biggest Josh Myers fan, but when he was out, whether it was for a series or a game or whatever it was, and, he missed a couple of times this year, a couple of games or parts of a couple of games, you felt his absence. The offensive line thrives on continuity. He is sort of the centerpiece of that line. He's a leader in the locker room. I wouldn't break the bank for Josh Myers. I would draft a center anyway, even if I re-sign Josh Myers, but I would not be adverse to bringing him back at the right price.
He is a guy where the one game that he was inactive for was the Detroit game at Lambeau Field, and they struggled. That offensive line, Elton Jenkins is a great left guard, not a great center, though. That was a bad game. And Elton Jenkins can play center, for a few plays, but he's not. I don't want that guy. I don't want Elton Jenkins starting at center. I think he's more valuable at left guard. And that's where I feel like Josh Myers is a very important player for the Green Bay Packers at the center spot. And the coaches love him. He's regarded as a leader in that locker room and a big leader. It's just a big presence. Jordan Love absolutely loves Josh Myers too. But I feel like this is kind of a John Runyon 2.0 situation where last year, I think the Packers were open to bringing John Runyon Jr. back. But then he got offered $10 million a year to go play for the New York Giants. And I think for the Packers, they said, hey, no, that's going to be a little bit too high for us. And I'm looking at some comparable deals where he's not going to make Creed Humphrey money, where Creed Humphrey is making on average $18 million a year. He shouldn't make that. Frank Ragnow for Detroit is making $13.5 million a year. He should not get anywhere above $10 million from the Green Bay Packers. I think the most comparable centers, honestly, are Buffalo's Connor McGovern, who's making just under $7.5 million a year, and Vegas's Andre James, who's making $8 million a year. Now, if the Packers, if if he is willing to play for $8 million a year or less, I say bring him back. But anything more than that, I think you got to let him walk. The only potential issue, though, Gil, is like what you said, where when he was out of games, that offensive line fell apart. And that could really be a good leverage tactic. If you're Josh Myers' representation, that's your leverage tactic right there. It's like, hey, look at how the Green Bay Packers were when he was not in the game. It was a huge difference. It really, truly was. And that's going to be the biggest factor. And that's going to be who's going to draw the line in the sand. And the Packers, Brian Gutekunst seems like a nice guy, seems like a guy that you could have a beer with, but that dude is cold and calculated. He's not afraid to make tough decisions. And guess what? If Josh Myers doesn't come to, if Josh Myers' representation doesn't come to the number that the Packers want to pay him at, it's not going to work.
No, it's not going to work. So, like I said, I wouldn't break the bank for Josh Myers, but I would welcome him back at the right rate.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's he's a former Buckeye. I have a lot of respect for former Buckeyes. Just a guy who loves to play ball. Obviously, everyone's going to look at him and Creed Humphrey because they were back-to-back picks, and the Packers could have had Creed Humphrey. Everyone knows that, but it just didn't work out that way. And it is what it is. And Brian Gutekunst was very much glowing about Josh Myers today in his end-of-season presser. And I think there's a good chance he could be back, but it's got to be for the right price. Gil, we've gone a little long today talking about the end of the season, mourning the end of the 2024 Packers season, looking ahead to 2025. What articles do you have coming up at Packers Post, Cheesehead TV? It just stinks that we're in off-season mode. I wish we were talking about a playoff game, but we have no control over what the Green Bay Packers do and don't do on Sundays.
Well, no. On thepackerspost.com, I did go in depth on all of the pending free agents plus Jaire Alexander as far as what I thought their future was, what their odds are of staying in Green Bay versus moving on. So I did that. And for Cheesehead TV, Keyshawn Nixon said, I don't want to return kicks anymore.
Yeah.
I want to be cornerback one. Well, the question I asked and tried to start to analyze is Keyshawn Nixon even potentially a cornerback one? So I took a look at that for Cheesehead.
That cornerback room, there's going to be a lot of transition. There's going to be some tough decisions made, and it's going to be very interesting going forward. Gil, you ready for some trivia?
I am.
Well, the 2024 season, it's come to a close for the Green Bay Packers. The season had a lot of promise, came to a crashing halt. In the playoff loss on Sunday at Philly, the Packers had an incredible amount of self-inflicted wounds, one after another. They beat themselves like none other. Packers actually outgained the Eagles in total yardage. Green Bay registered 302 yards of total offense, while the defense held the Eagles' offense to 290 total yards. Only a 12-yard difference, but still outgained them. In the Matt LaFleur era, the Packers have outgained their opponents in total yardage in the playoffs 5 times. Gil, how many playoff games have the Packers won in the Matt LaFleur era when outgaining the opponent in total yardage?
2.
You're close, but not 2. Only 1 game. Wow. And that was the 2020 divisional round playoffs against the LA Rams. In the Matt LaFleur era, overall, the Packers are 3-5 in the playoffs, and they're 1-4 in the playoffs when they outgain their opponents in total yardage. The 1 win came in that divisional round of the 2020 playoffs at Lambeau Field against the LA Rams, and the Packers outgained the Rams 484-244 in a 32-18 win. The 4 losses, they were in the 2020, in the 2019 NFC Championship game at San Francisco, in 2021 in the 2020 NFC Championship game against Tampa at Lambeau, the very next year in the divisional round against the 49ers back at Lambeau, and Sunday's wildcard round loss at Philly. Gil, I think finding a way to capitalize in the playoffs when you have the opportunities in the greatest it's just the greatest battle this Packer team is fighting right now. It's just finding a way to conquer that challenge, and the playoffs could look a lot different next season and beyond if they could just figure out how to capitalize when the moment's there.
Learning how to win. And I think it ties in again with the inexperience, the youngest team in the league. It goes back to that.
And Gil, I will stray a little bit away from Packer talk, but Wisconsin sports talk real quick as we wrap up, where a lot of Packer fans and Brewer fans, I know you're in New York. I know you're a New York Mets fan. Salutations to you. My best, my condolences to you. But baseball lost a legend today in Bob Uecker. Mr. Baseball passed away at 90 years old. The Milwaukee Brewers announced on Thursday morning. He was the Brewers radio announcer for 54 years. The guy was the soundtrack to Brewers baseball my entire life. He was Harry Doyle in the Major League movies. Just hilarious role. He was George Owens on the Mr. Belvedere sitcom, a regular on the Johnny Carson show. He was born and raised in Milwaukee, radio announcer for the Brewers for for 54 years. Truly was one of one. A guy that it's a hard day. It's a hard day in Wisconsin. I'll put it that way, where just a huge part of my life as a sports fan is now gone. And I don't know if you know of anything of Bob Uecker, but the guy was so larger than life in Wisconsin. I feel like larger than life just in baseball in general.
Yeah, baseball lost an icon, probably had more of an impact on the culture of baseball than any 200 hitter in the history of the game. A guy who exuded a love of the game and a love of just being Bob Uecker. And I think he will be missed, definitely by Brewers fans, and I think by baseball fans everywhere.
Yeah, the Brewers are really a sub note, a cliff note to what the Packers are in Wisconsin. I mean, the Packers are king. They really are king in Wisconsin, but people know the Milwaukee Brewers because of Bob Uecker. They know the Brewers because of Bob Uecker, and the guy was everything. I recommend just going into a YouTube wormhole and just watching videos of Bob Uecker on the Johnny Carson show, especially. You will laugh hysterically. I was watching quite a bit of videos today, and it's just a guy we're going to miss in Wisconsin in general. I guarantee you a lot of Packer fans are going to resonate with this as well. But yeah, I don't mean to end on a sad note, Gil, this episode, but this is just it's something that I felt like I had to bring up. And I hope up in heaven right now that he got a seat in the front row.
Absolutely. Rest in peace, Bob Uecker. He will be missed by baseball fans in Milwaukee and around Wisconsin, and really baseball fans everywhere. So an American institution passing on, and we wish his family and friends all our condolences at this point.
Well,
don't forget, by the way, we will be here all off season long, once a week. So we're not going anywhere. Lots to talk about in the off season, but that's it for today. We'll be right back here next week. Follow us on Twitter @BillPackers, @PackersTalk, on all things Packers, or to ask us questions. Or you can email us at gbpackerssean@gmail.com. Make sure you're subscribed to Packers Talk on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and hit the bell so you know when our next episode is coming out. Big thanks to PackersTalk.com for powering our show, and thank you for listening. Till next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.